Welcome to another video by Tech and Swords. My name is Marcus Fernstrom, and as you can probably guess, today we're going to talk about how to consume JSON data from a remote REST API. If you enjoy my videos, please consider supporting me on Patreon. There's a link below. Now let's get to it. So let's start with new project, use the program template, and it gives us nice defaults. We're going to use a website called JSON Placeholder. This is a great website that has example JSON data for all your testing needs. We're going to need the OpenSSL sockets unit. We're also going to need the FP HTTP client, FP-JSON, and the JSON parser. Let's take a look at our data first. If we scroll down to examples, resources, let's look at posts. So as you can see, we have a pretty straightforward JSON structure. We have an array with a bunch of objects, and they all have some strings and some integers, and that's it. So this is a great starting point. Before we can go use this data, we're going to need a JSON object, a tJSON array, an enumerator, and somewhere to store their HTTP GET response. Let's start by setting up our tJSON array. Let's make sure we clean that up as well. To fetch the JSON data, all we need is a simple GET. Just need the URL. Now, if we just output this data, as you can see, we're getting back the JSON data, but this is all one giant string. We can't actually use any of this as it is. First, we need to parse it. And we're casting it as an array. Now we need to loop it. So this enumerator is going to contain each of these blocks. But before we can use it, we need to cast the value of it as, in our case, a tJSON object. Now we can start outputting it. So let's go ahead and grab that title. There are a couple of ways you can access the data inside of it. I'm going to show you both the explicit method and a dot notation method. So let's start with the explicit method. In this case, we know it's a string, so we're going to access all the strings. And specifically, we want the title. We also want the body. So now if we run this, we get all our data. Let's go ahead and make this just a tad more readable. There we go. It's still a little hard to read, so let's add a blank line. There we go. Much easier to read. So how about the dot notation? It's used. Find path. But before we can output it, you need to specify what the type of data is. In this case, it is a string. Now it should look the same. I prefer this way of accessing the data. I feel that it's more readable, but it's up to you. Both methods work perfectly fine. Now let's take a look at a bit more complex data. So back on our JSON placeholder website, let's look at the users. And as you can see, we have an array with a bunch of objects, and we have integers, we have strings, and we have some nested objects. I'm just grabbing the URL. And let's output the person's name. Let's also do their email. Let's also do their address. So using the explicit method, you can do objects, address, strings, and street. So let's go ahead and do street, city, zip code. So now if we run this, we have the user's name, their email address, street, city, and zip code. Now let me show you why I think the dot notation is just a bit more readable. So let's just output this exact same data, but using dot notation. And as you can see, we have the same data duplicated. Password summit, player and a zip code. And to me, this is just a bit more readable than this. Let's say you also want the latitude and longitude. So again, let's start with the explicit method. So we have an object address, then we have another object, which is called geo, and we want the latitude, and we also want the longitude. And the same thing as dot notation. The deeper nested your data is, the cleaner it is to use something like find path. Now if you run it, we should have the same data duplicated. So that's not so bad, but what happens if a value doesn't exist? This is again where find path comes in very handy. So let's say we want to do a check on the geo longitude. All we have to do is make an if statement using find path, and if it's not null, then we can just go ahead and use it. This works just fine. Now if we put in our broken, and as you can see, it does not break. And there you are, a crash course in consuming JSON data from remote REST APIs using only FreePascal and the packages that comes with Lazarus. If you like my videos, articles, open source libraries, and so on, please feel free to check me out on Patreon. Anything and everything is appreciated. Thank you.